and that, you know, we basically are all, we all exist, we all occupy the same planet, and therefore there's no real need to make a distinction between the human and the non-human or natural. And from that position, it would be artificial and unnatural to exclude humans from some natural habitats and to call those places wildernesses. If humans are animals that belong in nature, a clear cut or a parking lot could be regarded as equally natural compared to a meadow or a forest. This line of reasoning, particularly in modern America, tends to be invoked by those parties and interests who want to develop wild lands, undeveloped land, and develop it either for real estate purposes or for other commercial purposes, and equally by those favoring additional road building and increased motorized access for recreational purposes or for commercial purposes. So a deconstructionist view also tends to advocate active management of forests and other wild lands and rejects the notion that we're doing nature the greatest help, doing ecosystems the greatest help, often simply by leaving them alone. Instead, the deconstructionist view often favors what is called active management, and the idea that a forest will be unhealthy unless human beings come and spend a lot of time and effort and energy somehow improving or maintaining or trimming that forest. But often these arguments are used to justify desired economic activities, specifically cutting and removing trees for commercial purposes as a commodity. And this is often presented, often described as forest health initiatives to prevent insect infestations or to prevent fires. This view is often called wise use. And by the wise use perspective, unmanaged forests and other wild lands left to themselves tend to be regarded as unproductive, unhealthy, or dangerous. And therefore, humans need to actively engage these places and somehow either improve them or correct them or fix them in some way. Against the deconstructionist view comes a position called the biocentric or deep ecology view. And those of you who are familiar with environmental criticism, eco-criticism, I think the biocentric or deep ecology view tends really to predominate in eco-critical discussions, often as not. It's popular in Europe, popular in Canada, popular in the United States, and I suspect to a pretty great degree in parts of Asia as well. By the biocentric, and again, just from an etymological standpoint, biocentric simply means life-centered or life-oriented rather than anthropocentric, which we learned yesterday. Remember, gentlemen, the term anthropocentric? What does that mean? Human-centered, right? We actually learned the word anthropomorphic, but they now know that anthro means human as a starting point, as a root. From that biocentric perspective, humans are in fact part of nature, but it does not therefore follow that we have a right to crowd out or harm other species in order to advance our own interests, particularly not to the extent of causing extinctions of other species. American public opinion shifted strongly toward this position in the late 1960s, culminating in the groundbreaking piece of legislation in 1973 known as the Endangered Species Act, which at least within American law is the first piece of legislation ever to grant specific rights to something other than human beings. In addition, the Endangered Species Act subordinates human interests in deference to the basic survival of other plant and animal species. This position, the biocentric position, tends to be invoked by environmentalists and others interested in preserving wild lands, where, to use the language of the 1964 Wilderness Act, another important piece of American legislation, humankind is only a visitor. A basic unstated premise of this position is that at present, a significant percentage of people will, if given the opportunity, abuse nature. Some of these abuses include overgrazing, clear cutting, and timber cutting on unstable slopes, which result in landslides, that in turn leading to loss of fish habitat. In addition, abuses of nature that seem fairly prevalent unless prevented by law include poaching, arson, vandalism, off-road driving without respect for habitat integrity, littering and dumping of trash, noise pollution, which specifically negatively affects animal fertility rates, and soil loss and soil degradation resulting from aggressive agricultural production. In other words, over-farming of land, which is sometimes referred to as mining of the soil, in the sense that it takes nutrients out of the soil at a non-sustainable rate, taking nutrients out faster than they're being replaced. A corollary notion to the biocentric or deep ecology view is that nature is at its healthiest when unmolested by human economic activity. In other words, leaving land alone is often doing it the greatest favor, or at least using it very lightly rather than trying to make it produce as aggressively as possible. Most management by this view is in fact simply the selective removal for profit of various resource commodities. This selective removal tends to harm and disbalance natural ecosystems in complex and not well understood ways. The third of the four positions that I'm outlining, and in some ways related to that biocentric or deep ecology view, but perhaps a little bit more solidly supported by scientific principles, and not coincidentally a position that tends often to be promoted, advocated, and practiced by trained scientists, is what we now call the conservation biology view. For much of the 20th century, biologists, zoologists, and botanists continued in the path of a traditional 19th century taxonomic approach to plants and animals, where each scientist would concentrate on classifying and categorizing and understanding individual species in isolation as specimens to be collected, dissected, or cataloged. In the final decades of the 20th century, however, an increasing number of wildlife biologists came to focus not on individual species, but rather on ecosystem-level relationships between species, notably including predator-prey relationships and interdependent or symbiotic relationships between different species, sometimes between different animal species, often between plant communities and animal communities as well.